Hey everybody, welcome to episode 71 of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. This is a very special episode. Much like the ukulele episode, we have answers from the developers themselves of A Hat in Time. This time around, I got Jonas on the line actually answering questions with real audio from the man himself. So to all of you who want all the answers, well, stay tuned and hear them yourself. But with that said, let's get going. Well, to start, there's a whole bevy of stuff to talk about in the first room of the game. The first thing that I noticed, which is a little bit disturbing to me, is apparently inside of Hat Kid's toy box, there happens to be a knife underneath here. That certainly raises some questions for me, but we'll get back to that. Also underneath this tool bin is a letter, and it reads, "I owe you half a cookie, check kitchen, R. King." And just across the room is Hat Kid's pillow pit. And an interesting little tidbit here is that whenever Hat Kid jumps into the pillow pit, you can see pillows fly out of the pit. But just off screen, you can actually see the props used for that effect. See, they're stored in this specific area, and when you land in the pillows, they are then transported from this spot to wherever you jump to give that effect. At various points of the game, characters will visit your ship and quickly take you to some tutorial room. And of course, the question I gotta ask is, where the heck is this all being taken place? And what's really awesome here is that this set piece really does exist within the same spot that you talk to whatever character you're speaking to. So right now we're inside the piloting area, which is exactly where we talk to this specific character. And if you change the field of view wide enough, you can actually see the set piece just disappear after this scene is done. But it all happens so quickly, I actually have to slow it down for you to show you the exact moment in which it all disappears and where the characters are being transported to. So here in the Mafia town bathroom, there's some really interesting stuff behind these bathroom stalls that's very difficult to see on account that you can't open up the stalls yourself in game. But when you do, you can see that there is this one Mafia town member standing in front of a toilet with brown water and the letter S in the toilet. And in the next stall over, there is a pool of red liquid. I think it's pretty obvious what that might be, with a W behind the toilet. Now I know what a lot of you are already assuming these letters stand for. W and S. Wayland Smithers. But in fact, if you turn the W upside down, you'll see that it actually spells out the initials Maggie Simpson. No, honestly, there's a lot of dark humor at play here, and I'd love to give you a specific answer as to what this all means. And I did ask my guest, who will be on in a minute, I promise you, Jonas Kærlev, the game's director, what this all meant. And all we have for an answer for now is that they're just fun Easter eggs, and that you probably shouldn't put too much thought into it. Same can be said for all other sinister Easter eggs that you'll be seeing in this episode. During the scene with one of the first bosses of the game, you end up having the camera locked so that you can move in a 2D space, which makes it really surprising to me how underplayed the size of this actual area is. It's fully realized with enough seating to fit an entire audience, as well as a giant chandelier and much else. Speaking of this boss, when you get to a certain point, you trigger a scene in which you start speaking to him, but if you take the camera behind his throne, you can actually see that there's a doorway that's unused. Let's do a zoom out for the very start of Chapter 2. See, once you reach Dead Bird Studios, you can actually see a parking lot right behind you. Although at no point your character is allowed to leave these doors to go check out the parking lot. And so not only do we want to go out here for curiosity's sake, I kind of want to get an idea of how many cars are actually in this parking lot. And when we zoom the camera all the way out, it's actually really surprising how many cars there actually are. So many, in fact, I thought there may have been a cryptic message in the lines of cars, but no, I was studying this for 5 minutes for seemingly no reason. Alright, let's finally get the game's director Jonas on the line. Mr. Kærlev, good sir, I got a question for you. In the train sequence, it looks as though the track actually repeats itself. However, the effect is handled in a way that seems different from other games I've covered. Here, it almost looks like the environment is rendering in one end and rendering out on the other. And if I zoom the camera out far enough, it just disappears completely. So my question is, how is this effect pulled off, and why does the environment disappear when the player attempts to reach the end?
So in video games, there's always an incentive to push as much as you can onto the GPU, because the GPU is way more powerful than the CPU, especially on consoles. So what we do is we push a vertex shader to the GPU that actually translates the mesh. So nothing is actually moving, It's just the position that the vertices are rendered is moved in the shader. And the reason the mesh disappears when you look at it from a certain angle is because the frustum culling, which is the process of figuring out what is actually rendering on screen, is happening on the CPU. And the CPU doesn't know that the GPU is going to move the mesh. So the CPU just checks against the default position of the mesh and checks, okay, are you looking at it right now? And that's why if you look at it from certain angles, it just disappears entirely, because the CPU doesn't know that the mesh is moving.
Alright, let's take a look at one of the many time rift areas. This beautiful landscape always looks like it's underwater, which by association means that there has to be whales here. Well, there didn't have to be whales here, it's actually kind of a nice touch. And I just wanted to zoom in on one of these whales to get a good look at the detail, which is actually pretty impressive. Very good use of textures and a lot of realism on the eyes. Another thing I wanted to look at is the towers themselves off in the background. These are, of course, clock towers. And one of the cool things about these towers is that it's not incredibly simple geometry like you see in most backdrop buildings. These ones instead have elongated geometry that actually cuts from one end of the face to the other side. So instead of one flat texture to represent the hour of the day, it's actually one long rectangle. And the same can be said for the windows as well. Really quick, I just want to show you that the character DJ Grooves actually has eyeballs underneath those big giant sunglasses of his. Alright, so I got questions here, and one of which I can answer on my own, which is, where does the Snatcher sack come from? And if we take the camera just below the ground surface, you can see the sack for itself lying in wait, as well as the ropes hanging from nothing in the sky. But that cool transitional scene, how is that pulled off? Well, thankfully on my own I was able to see where this scene actually is in relation to the rest of the map. And when you're in the scene, it shows up above the original area, and according to Jonas, who will mention this in a second, this area is well below the original area when it's not in use. But to explain how Hat Kid seamlessly goes from the original area to this Snatcher area, I'll leave that to Jonas to explain.
So for the Snatcher traps is what we call them. When the player steps into a trap and the arena appears, we move them into a different drawing path, which means we draw them after everything else. So first we draw the main geometry at the level and then they get drawn. Which means that regardless of where you look, you're always going to be seeing them first because they've been drawn last. But that wasn't quite enough to have the scenario work, because HatKit would still collide with geometry. Just because it's not being rendered doesn't stop it from existing. So what we did to fix that is just move the entire arena 1000 units up into the air once the transition has been fully completed. And then we move them back 1000 units again once it's done. And that's all there is to it basically.
Now to mention one of the quirkiest things I've seen on this show, there are a lot of Easter eggs outside of the boundaries of this game. In fact, there may be one in every single level of every single chapter of this game. Now I can't confirm that myself, but I've seen enough of them at this point where I think that you guys should probably try to find them all yourself, but I've seen a ton of cheese wheels that say sawed off outside of the game's boundaries. There are literally so many in so many places that I can't keep count, but here's just a few that I found on my own. Now, wait a minute, I hear you say. Where did you find that door? I haven't seen that in the final release of A Hat in Time. Well, apparently in Queen Vanessa's manor, a cut third floor still remains at the top of the map. Although it can't be accessed by normal means, many of these rooms still exist inside the final build. There's even a cut character model here hiding underneath the floorboards. In fact, we have a direct quote from Jonas about all of this. He says, "The third floor in Vanessa Manor was actually part of the game's beta build, but we cut it because we didn't like how it turned out. It used to have a segment where a shadow version of yourself would block the route, as well as a very locked door at the end of the hallway. You could never actually get inside the door, and Queen Vanessa would get really bothered if you got near it." Thank you, Jonas. Although there is something on the other side of that door, as you saw a moment ago, so thanks for rewarding us for the effort. In one of the final areas of the game, I actually found a really interesting looking structure outside of the game's boundaries. It even had its own unique texture to it. So once again I asked Jonas for some answers and he gave me a very thorough answer. This is the exact quote from him on this subject as well. He said the structure you're seeing is BSP, also known as binary space partitioning, which is similar to what games like Doom and Half-Life uses. BSP is often used for quick prototyping as it's super easy to use. The ending level was prototyped using BSP. And then the actual level geometry came in. We just didn't remove the BSP. The pattern you're seeing is the default texture. Ah boy, this is the big one. Well, first of all, before I go in and explain all this, I was tipped off by Shane from Digino Gaming. He mentioned to me that you can use the Dweller's Mask to reveal this coded message in an area that you can't even reach without no clipping. So you need to boundary break, and you need to use the Dweller's Mask in order to see this. And I did take the time of translating this all for you guys. I just didn't have the time to try to figure out all the clues and find what this message is trying to convey. However, it reads 2 stars, a black hole, gateway of flight, the forgotten temple, a message of hands, pillars of fire, the souls of his people, raining sun, the truth between 2 travelers of time, a peaceful garden, the promise of a hat. This is probably big stuff. I really hope you guys are able to figure out whatever the heck this is supposed to mean and find out what all these clues lead to. If you want to use the same tools that I use to look at this clue yourself, all you have to do is just go into the settings on your game, turn on Enable Console, then press the button right above the tab button and type in Enable Cheats, then type in Ghost, and it should be able to work just fine.
Jonas, thank you so much for guesting on the show. It really means a lot to me because a lot of times I can't get the answers to some of these things that I cover on the show, and it's a real shame. But having you on the show and providing answers straight from the horse's mouth means a lot to me and a lot of my fans. So thank you so much. I hope to see you again in the future. Also, big thank you to Shane from Digino Gaming for giving me that tip off on the last segment of the show. If you're watching this on the day of release, this episode won't be available yet, but I actually am guesting on Digino Gaming, and I will be providing a link to that video down below as soon as it becomes available. So look forward to that. Show your support. And also, I guess one last thing I want to say is Matthew Long, you've supported me for so many months. I can't believe the amount of generosity you've given me and the amount of support you've provided for me. So I just want to say big thank you for everything that you've done, and I really hope that you do wonderful things with your YouTube channel. Make sure you send me a link as soon as you produce your next episode, buddy. But anyways, guys, I'm off. I'm taking out. That's not a phrase. Anyways, I'll see you guys later. Bye.